Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zadov's chess channel, and welcome to the Airthings Masters tournament in 2020. We're now in the round 3. The most attractive game from the round 3, I think it was the game between Anish, Giri and Wesley. Anish Giri played here with the white pieces, Wesley with the black pieces. And I'm going to tell you again about the setup of this tournament. We have 12 players, among them also the world champion Magnus Carlsen. And first, the players will play one round robin. It means that they play against each other. But then after this one round robin, they have to play this quarterfinal stage. So the best 8 players are moving up to the quarterfinals, and then it's a knockout stage. So who wins is moving up to the semifinals. Who loses is out of the tournament. So let's check out now the game between Anish and Wesley. Anish played here the first move, knight to f3. We have d5 by Wesley. We have g3 by Anish Giri going into a King's Indian attack. The King's Indian attack is the King's Indian defense, but reversed. We're playing it as white. It's a sort of a King's Indian, but with a +1 tempo, which I think is a good opening line. You can check it out. You can study it. Maybe if you have trouble to find you a nice repertoire as white. G3 perfectly fine. We have knight to f6 and bishop to g2. e6, very interesting idea, very interesting setup here by Wesley. Wesley plays here, I think, a very calm game. He's not rushing into tactics. He wants to secure the king. He wants to develop his minor pieces, and what he basically wants to do is to play move c5 and then knight to c6, where he could have, I think, a very powerful central control with both of the centralized knight and also with his 2 advanced pawns on c5 and d5. So I really liked this approach by Wesley against the King's Indian attack, not rushing into tactical messed up positions here. e6 perfectly fine. Here bishop to e7, again a healthy developing move. We have c4 by Anish Giri. One of the main ideas of the King's Indian attack would be to play something like d3 and then e4, but this d3 has to be then further prepared with knight to d2 and then e4. Meanwhile, black can do again something, so this idea, this preparation is sometimes a little bit too slow, because black can play c5 and even d4 to create some space advantage after a potential d3 move. So here in the game, that's why Anish Giri breaks the position in the center immediately with d takes c4. If d with c4, if d takes c4 happens, then we can play queen to a4 and we can catch again the pawn, but it's not the point about that. I think after the move d takes c4, the game becomes really dynamic, the game becomes open, and you're basically opening this long diagonal, which is the main strength of the setup of white. So that's why, again, a normal move here by Wesley. So he plays simply kingside castling, and we have now b3 by Anish. So what Anish is doing here is this double fianchetto style. Sometimes I like to play this double fianchetto, but there are disadvantages also of this setup. When we're developing, for instance, the bishop on b2, then sometimes, at least it's for me like that, I don't know where to go with my knight. If I go with knight to c3, then it's blocking out my bishop's activity. If I go something like d3 and then knight to d2, then I don't like this knight activity. So sometimes it's a bad thing, this double fianchetto. It's not the point that Anish Giri has made a mistake here. I just wanted to point out how I think about positions and how I think where should I develop my minor pieces. So that's why in most of my cases I am trying to never play the double fianchetto, at least when I'm not forced to do it. But okay, b3, perfect, fine move. It's still a good line in the game. We have c5, but you see now the problems. You have played many times with your pawns. Now Wesley is challenging the center immediately. He plays a very nice positional move, c5. Of course, it's a natural move. We are threatening also to lock the position with the move d4 and play something like knight to c6 and then e5. Then we could have a very nice central pawn storm. So that's why here Anish undermines the pressure in the center. We have c takes d5. Here, knight to d5 was played by Wesley. So e takes d5 is suggested by the engine, but in my opinion, although it's evaluated as an inaccuracy, I still like Wesley's move here, knight to d5, because this knight can always be kicked away by a piece or by a pawn. But if you play with the pawn, something like e4, then we can play knight to b4, and we can also target here the weak square on d3. So that's why this knight on d5 is perfectly fine, I think. That's why knight to c3 played by Anish Giri, challenging the knight in the center, and we have now knight to c6. Bishop to b2, knight takes c3. We have bishop takes c3. If d takes c3 happens, then I think the game is too symmetrical. I think this game would end in a draw in this top grandmaster level. We can trade off the queens, develop the bishop somewhere, compete on the d file, and I think in most of these cases the games would end in a draw. But okay, here Anish played bishop takes c3. Is trying maybe an e3 d4 pawn breakthrough motif to really break the position in the center, undermine this pressure by the c5 pawn, because the c5 pawn is the only pawn on the board that's advanced by two squares. You see many of these pawns by white are still on the starting squares. The only advanced pawn is really this pawn on c5. So here, after the move bishop to c3, queen to c7, what Wesley So is trying to do now is to get the pawn on e5 here. But first of all, this move e5 liberates also this long diagonal for the light square bishop, but we're creating also a space advantage in the center with the move e5. We would have sort of a reversed Maroczy-bind setup. If you're familiar with the Maroczy-bind, when we play against the Sicilian, then we're advancing our c4 pawn, we're advancing also our e4 pawn. So that's why black is trying now to do the same, and maybe occupy then with one of our minor pieces the weak d4 square, because if you play e3 in order to prevent this idea, then you risk rook to d8, and again to leave sort of a backward pawn here on the d file. So these are the tiny little things that I always think about when I play chess. I always like to watch this pawn structure, what could happen, how to improve the position of my pawns, how to improve the position of my minor pieces. Here, queen to c7, at least black has here an equal game. I really like more black's position, because this move e5 is really something that always would bother me in the game. Queen to b1 is the okay move. It's really an unnatural square for the queen, but when you think about this more, it's a good preparation here by Anish to play the move then queen to b2 and occupy now this long diagonal, create this very nice queen and bishop battery on dark square. So e5 by Wesley, we have e3. You see now these problems. We would love to, of course, to play the move d4, then to break this central control that black has here with these two advanced pawns. But now f5 played by Wesley. So he's threatening also something like f4, then followed maybe with e4. So far the e4 is protected, but when we manage to occupy it somehow, protect somehow the e4, maybe even e4 immediately, then maybe to get our knight here to e5, this is also very dangerous. So that's why in the game rook to c1 here played by Anish, he's really trying now his d4 idea, because if something opens, then there are also maybe some tactics against the queen here on c7. In the game, Wesley tries, of course, a natural developing move, bishop to e6, and now comes queen to b2. Bishop to f6, competing now on dark squares, protecting, of course, our e5 pawn, and now comes, I think, really the critical moment of the game. It's the move knight to e1. Anish Giri maneuvers the knight. He liberates, of course, this bishop's activity on light squares, but here Wesley So shows why he's really now one of the best grandmasters these days. He's really in top shape recently. He played really great tournaments, won also a tournament recently. So knight to e1 is really a huge positional mistake, because what we can notice now, again I'm pointing out, is this backward pawn. The backward pawn is always a problem in chess, and what to do against a backward pawn, we're trying to block it. So that's why rook to d8 here by Wesley. So of course you can improve the position like Anish did. He improved the position of this pawn, played it to d3, but still this knight is now only used as a defensive piece. It's only protecting the d3 square, and you don't want to play with your minor pieces like that. You want to play active with your pieces. And now after the move bishop to d5, this was a great move by Wesley. So he's trading off basically his bad piece for the best piece by Anish Giri. Instead of this maybe d3 idea, it's really unbelievable that probably the best move here is to take bishop takes c6, giving up maybe our strong bishop here. But the problem of blacks is that you cannot take with the queen. You will lose your e5 pawn, so you're probably forced to play something like b takes c6. And okay, I still think that black is slightly better, but maybe we can hang on to this position somehow, because the knight is at least is protecting somehow the light squares in the on the board. Maybe we can try something like f3 e4 to really cement the position on light squares, or maybe something like d3 e4 f3 to create some kind of a fortress. But still it's a risky choice, as I said. If this bishop gets somehow into the game, if this bishop attacks the light square, still it's slightly better for black. But here, after the move d3, Wesley so simply gets rid of this very annoying bishop on g2. We have b4 by Anish Giri, bishop takes g2, king to g2, knight to g2 is not a possibility, of course, because your d3 pawn is hanging. Here we have king to g2, we have c takes b4, bishop to b4, and now rook to f7. Very important move. What we can notice now that the b file is open. First of all, we're protecting always our 7th rank, but the main goal about this move, of course, the rook is attacked, but I think our b7 pawn is the only pawn that can be attacked now by white with some rook to b1 ideas. Rook to f7 is also very good because you're not vulnerable to some queen to b3 attacks. What black wants to do is now ready to crack the position with the move f4. And after bishop to c3, that's exactly what happened. We have f4. This is now really a bad position here for white. After e takes f4, we have e takes f4. Now rook to b1. Attacking our b7 pawn, but it's not a problem here. Bishop to c3, queen to c3, and now queen to d7. We're trying to sneak in with our queen. The problem is now you have not played with your rook, you have not advanced your pawn. Now it's time to occupy with our knight, this very important square in the game. Queen to c5 was played, and now knight to d4. It's really game over here for Anish Giri because f3 is the threat. If you try g takes f4, then you're opening simply too much the position in front of the king. Queen to g4 will happen, and again you simply lost. Rook to f4 will happen, so we can include also this rook into the game. You see how far away these two rooks by whites are. They're simply too far away from the action. After the move knight to d4, here rook to c4 was played, but now comes f3. In this position, Anish Giri, believe me or not, resigned. What's the idea about this move? f3, why did Anish resign? Because after king to g1 or king to h1, whatever you try, you get here this very annoying move, knight to e2. And if you play king to f1, then of course we have queen to h3. You could maybe even cover here, but it's of course losing. But there is, I think, is also a very cool move, knight takes g3. If you try h6 g3, then you get queen to h3, queen to h1 with the check. If you try f takes g3, then queen takes g2, and it's here a checkmate. So there's nothing you can do. This check is simply too much to handle. As I said, in this position, after the move f3, Anish Giri resigned. So incredible what happened, but you see how strong Wesley saw is. I don't think that he played here such a brilliant game, but putting the pieces really on natural squares, developing them fast, getting a nice setup, trying to search for weakness. He got his goal. He found this backward pawn in Anish Giri's position, played simply against this backward pawn, realized his ideas, traded off the key defender, which was of course the light square bishop. Then afterwards simply played this f4 pawn breaker motif, split the pawns in front of the king, getting this knight very active, and punished really this move, knight to e1 by Anish Giri. Really a weird setup here, and Anish Giri is now on the last place with only half of the point after 3 rounds. So on the other hand, Anish Giri is sharing the first place, I think, with Hikaru Nakamura and Levon Aronen. And let me see, Temur Ajabov, these 4 guys have 2 points after 3 games, so they have won 1 game, and we'll see now what will happen in continuation of the game. We'll still have the round 4 today, and then tomorrow another 4 games, and then after that we'll have 3 rounds, and then afterwards, as I said, the quarterfinal stage. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. A really cool game played by Wesley. Really nice and pragmatic game that he played here, really without complications. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my coverage so far. Here's the link. And if you want to see the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.